Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Paige and you are here today at the Deschutes Public Library for a Plotters Plotting panel. I am joined by 4 local authors and they are each here to answer some questions about their processes, what they're working on next, and how you can go about plotting your own works. We are joined today by Kathleen Valenti. She is the author of Protocol and 39 Winks, the first 2 in her trilogy of Maggie O'Malley mysteries. A lifelong Bend resident and Mountain View High School graduate, Kathleen is an award-winning copywriter who is well known in the Oregon advertising community. She has been working for almost 20 years, and her works combine humor with suspense to craft page-turning mysteries. We are also joined by Kim Cooper Findling and her daughter, Libby. Kim is an award-winning writer and editor of travel, lifestyle, essay, memoir, and journalism. She is the author of Day Trips from Portland, Getaway Ideas for the Local Traveler, Chance of Sun, an Oregon memoir, and the recently published Bend, Oregon Vacations, Day Trips for Curious Families. And of course, she co-wrote The Sixth Storm with her daughter, Libby. And we also have Sarah Smith. She is a copywriter turned author who wants to make the world a lovelier place, one kissing story at a time. Her love of romance began when she was 8, and she discovered her auntie's stash of romance novels, and she's been hooked ever since. When she's not writing, you can find her hiking, eating chocolate, and perfecting her lumpia recipe. She lives in Bend, Oregon with her husband and adorable cat, Salem. So please welcome our great authors. We'll go ahead and get started here with a question for Kathleen. Kathleen, tell us, are you a plotter or a pantser? And what exactly is a pantser?
That is such a good question. I mean, they're both really good questions. And, you know, the truth is there are as many ways to plot as there are to write. And it all comes down to the individual writer. And so, you know, some people like to plot by creating an outline, like an old school outline with Roman numerals. Some people like to reverse outline and begin at the end and then come back to the beginning. Others like to create sort of tent poles where they have specific moments, like 5 to 10 moments. And then there are people, and those are all kind of under the plotting category. And then there are people who just like to have sort of a general idea of the story and fly by the seat of their pants. And so those are the so-called pantsers. And I definitely fall into the former category of plotters. I just find it, for me, so much easier to build a mystery when I have a super clear idea and a roadmap of where I'm going. And I think that's especially helpful in mystery because along the way you have to weave in not only different plot points and sort of an overarching character arc, but also clues and red herrings. So I feel like I would be very lost without having, you know, an outline to go by. But I have friends in the mystery community who tell me that they don't actually even know who done it until they reach that point in the writing process themselves. So it's a mystery to them as well. So, you know, all different ways to write and all different ways to plot.
That's fantastic. All right, so Kim and Libby, kind of spinning off that, how does plotting become different when you're considering age of audience? And what have you two learned the most about plotting, especially when you're working together on the same piece of work?
I think I'll start with the second part of that question, and also building on what Kathy just said. We were 100% pantsers when we wrote this. We dove in very, very with a lot of excitement and absolutely no idea where we were going. In fact, we didn't even really know we were writing a mystery when we started. So I'm not entirely sure that that's the way I would do it again, but that's definitely the way that it happened for us. And Libby and I have done a lot of presentations in schools with our book, and we've talked to the kids about that plotters and pantsers thing, and it's always fun because they really respond to that concept. I mean, most kids I think are pantsers, but to kind of give them the permission to do that, you know, just keep going, you'll figure out what happens. And we did, but also the other thing about pantsing is you end up with a lot of material on the cutting room floor, I would say. you have to be willing to make some hard decisions along the way with that. So in terms of writing for youth, do you want to talk about that? Like what?
Okay. We knew that we had to have a clear structure and like plot is plot, but pacing with younger audiences, we had to keep them entertained and stuck to our story. So we had to keep the pacing quick.
Yeah, I think people respond to story, the major elements of plot, the same, whether they're 3 or 50 mainly. But I did feel, speaking of cutting room floor, I mean, we ended up cutting like 20,000 words from our manuscript just to get that pacing tightened up, for which I think is really, I think is important with all audiences, but especially with youth.
Fantastic. So Sarah, tell us about your outlining process. You write romance novels. Do you have an ending in mind where you want to go? There are certain tropes you can definitely follow in the romance novel genre, but your works go where they will. So tell us about that.
Yeah, I definitely, so I definitely used to be a pantser back in the day. And that was definitely how that was like the fun of it for me. Like I liked not really knowing what was going to happen and just kind of writing what I felt like I wanted to write. But when I started wanting to write books for traditional publishing industry, like outlines are pretty key. I mean, you have to turn in an outline to your editor or your publisher, whoever you're working with, and you can't really just say like, oh, I'll figure it out. You need to give them some sort of like planned outline of what you're going to do. So what I do is I write a pretty general outline, and it's only ever like maybe 2 pages, where I just set out like the major plot points. So like the tropes in romance that you were saying, like the meet cute, the building of attraction, the major conflict points, the climax, the dark moment, the resolution, all that stuff. I know what those are going to be, but that's still a pretty general guideline for me, because that still gives me the freedom to kind of fill in what happens in between. And also, if I want to like if inspiration hits and I want to like deviate a little bit, I feel like that gives me the freedom to do that. So I think I'm lucky in that romance has a pretty well-defined like plot arc and story structure. So that's easy to follow, but I can also like fill in what I want to do too.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of great that there's sort of that middle ground too, where you can be kind of a plantser, where you can have a little plotting and a little pantsing, because there is something that's so organically wonderful about being a pantser. And it's funny because my last book, I outlined it to death. I had like a 30-page outline. And then I found that as I was writing, opportunities would come up. And then I felt like, well, do I need to be faithful to the outline or faithful to the character and the story? And so I ended up, cutting room floor for that too. It's like, some of that stuff just falls by the wayside, and you have to become, more true to what the overall vision is as opposed to the outline. So I think it's really great that there's just kind of room for both, and you maybe can kind of go between categories depending.
I'm really impressed that you wrote a 30-page outline. I don't think I could ever do that. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It was too much. I went way too far. And like I said, I spent all this time, and then as I got to the point, I'm like, I don't like that anymore.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work. So, but the beauty of the cutting room floor, I find, is that it seems like sometimes you can find a home for it later. So Kim and Libby, maybe book number 2.
Well, in fact, yeah, we actually cut a whole character point of view, which is a perfect setup for a sequel, right?
Yeah.
Dive into the other characters. He stayed in the book, but not his point of view. So we've talked about that. It was sad to kill Jerry.
Well, I think that's great. In fact, some of my favorite authors will do that. They'll jump from point of view character from a previous book to the next book. Tana French does that beautifully in her Dublin Squad mystery series, and I absolutely love that. So I'd be looking forward to that book of yours.
Get busy.
Get busy.
So Kathleen, speaking about this 30-page outline, what are important considerations when plotting a mystery?
Well, I feel, there are so many things to keep in mind with any genre, but I think with mystery, the two things that I sort of keep in the forefront are creating a story question and then building suspense throughout the book. So the story question kind of gets the reader hooked into the mystery, and then building suspense keeps him or her turning the page. And I think for a lot of people who come to suspense or thriller or mystery, they are looking for that sort of page turning experience. A lot of them come just for the puzzle, but I think people do like to be sort of pulled through. So those are the things that I sort of think of. And the story question is sort of what inspires the reader to look for answers. So in mystery, it's who done it, which is usually followed by why done it. And then secondarily, there is sort of the question of character, which is why is your main character involved? Is it just his or her job, or is there something beyond that? And if it's the latter, then there's great opportunity for character development. So that's kind of the story question, in the overall premise. And then you have other questions like, why this crime, why this victim, why these suspects, why these clues. And so those questions start to build a sense of suspense. And then the suspense just sort of keeps the reader engaged and moving through the story. And that's sort of how I see it. I mean, there's sort of tentpole moments throughout with the plot, but I feel like when you have your story anchored around a question and then moments that can build suspense, then that's a pretty powerful combination for that genre.
So Kim and Libby, what do you think? How do characters' actions drive the plot, or vice versa? And what in general are three main questions necessary to any good story? So Kathleen Kim gave us some key elements of mystery, but what do we need in a plot for any story at all?
Do you want me to start with that second one, the three questions? So years ago, I started going to workshops for screenwriters, which is kind of a side story. Mainly, I would find myself teaching at writers' conferences, teaching nonfiction writing, which I did for 15 years before. I never thought I would even write fiction. So this whole fiction thing was a segue. But in I would be teaching these nonfiction workshops at writers' conference, and then I would have some time on my hands, and I'd like go sneak into screenwriting. Like, what are they doing over there? And Michael Arndt, who wrote Little Miss Sunshine, the screenplay, he won an Oscar for it. I saw him speak, and he was the first one that turned me on to this concept of these three sort of conflicts or questions in every story. And he used film, of course, but there's an internal conflict, an external conflict, and then the central question, which I don't know if that's the same, Kathy, as your initial kickoff question. But once you kind of understand what those three are, it's fun to try to analyze, movies or books that you're reading and try to figure out what they are. And then, of course, when you're writing your own story, you've got to know what those three are. And they can be pretty elusive, they can be pretty vague. Like Libby and I were just talking before this panel about Finding Nemo, which is a story that everyone knows. And in Finding Nemo, the internal conflict is Marlin's internal struggle. Can he get over the loss of his wife and the fear of the so much fear that he has and his overprotectiveness of Nemo? The external conflict or question is usually the easiest one to figure out. It's just like, what is the plot doing? It's Finding Nemo is the external conflict. And then the central question usually isn't really totally revealed until the end, but it's also powerful to reveal it at the end. You have to satisfy basically all of these questions. And I think the central question in Finding Nemo is sort of like what constitutes good parenting is really a parenting question, which is interesting for another reason, because that's really for the adults, right? Like it's a kids movie with this very weighty adult central question. After me dabbling in the screenplay workshops and still like never ever thinking I would write fiction, I started to take all of the plot understanding that I'd gathered from these workshops and just kind of like pass the time. When Libby and her sister were tiny, I would analyze every Pixar film as we were watching it, you know, and plot point. So it's sort of funny, like all of that studying of plot I did, never thinking I would use it. But anyway, so those are the three questions as I see them. And then Paige, what was the other part of your question?
So Kathleen was talking about how her characters can kind of drive the plot forward. You know, there's the questions and then there's the characters.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
You and Libby were talking about cutting an entire point of view. So
Right.
How do your characters fit into all of this?
I think Libby should take that.
Okay, so I did theater. I've done theater a lot. And we had an exercise where in each scene we had to find what we wanted to like take away from it, our goal in the scene. And I think doing that helped me realize like what my character is really like needs to do. And that helps when we're working on plot, because it goes back to the core of like what we need to write. And it also revealed aspects that we wouldn't really have seen before in our characters. And that can bring new experiences out.
Yeah, I think that remembering that we're trying to get inside the character's head and thinking about what they really need or want can change the plot sometimes, or at least amplify it. And Libby's theater exercises have been kind of like, oh, let's steal from that, you know, like, so to see the, well, especially when you're pantsing, right? Like, what's the plot gonna do? So yeah.
So Sarah, jump in here. In a romance novel, there's a specific arc that you mentioned, you know, this is kind of the way the story is going to go. How do you write compelling narratives and compelling characters to keep your readers engaged, even if they kind of already know where the story might end up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think that can be something that a lot of people kind of point to romance as not necessarily like a negative, or like why they wouldn't like be interested in it, because they're like, oh, we know what's going to happen, like they're going to end up together, and you know, what's the point? We know how the story is going to unfold. And I mean, that's a fair thing to say, because yeah, if it's a romance or a rom-com, you know that the two characters are going to end up together in the end. But it's also, I mean, that's, to me, it doesn't, that doesn't necessarily bother me. Like even if I know the destination, if I have a good time getting there, like who even cares? But so for what I do is I do these two things that it was advice that I got from another writer who I really admire, who her name is Gemma Burgess, and she used to write rom-com novels, and she writes screenplays now, but she gave me the advice to start chapters in the middle of a conversation, because it kind of just plunges the reader in what's happening, and it makes them, if you do it well, it makes them want to, you know, read on and see what they're talking about, and it helps sort of capture the reader into the story immediately. And then also ending chapters on a cliffhanger, which is kind of not the most, you know, groundbreaking thing in the world to do, but it's really effective, and it's something that I find myself totally buying into as a reader. Like if I end a chapter and it's like a character says something, or they like grab another character's hand, or they like fall off of something or whatever, I immediately want to know, like, okay, are they okay? What did they say? Or what's going to happen now? And it's just been a really effective way for me to figure out how to build suspense and to move the plot along in a genre where like almost everybody knows how it's going to end, because you know that in romance they're going to end up together. But if you can make their journey along the way like exciting and question here and there, like what's going to happen, what are they going to do, it's still like, for me, I think it's still like a really compelling way to tell the story.
So speaking of suspense, Kathleen, mysteries, it's all about suspense. How do you do that? How do you get people gasping in their seats on the edge of their chairs, ready to find out what happens next and who done it?
Yeah, well, I mean, that is such a perfect setup, because you're right. I mean, it's not just about that genre, but we definitely want, as readers, to be sort of propelled through a story and wanting to see what's going to happen next. And so, absolutely, I absolutely believe in sort of starting each chapter kind of in the middle. Not a lot of setup. There's that sense of immediacy, and you are there. And having those cliffhangers at the end, you know, where a reader might take a natural break to just sort of encourage that continuation of reading, because I think the worry is that we want the book to be compelling enough that if it's set aside, there's going to be that desire to pick it back up. So absolutely, cliffhangers, starting in the middle. I like to, at the beginning of a book, I like to have a prologue. And I know that there's lots of different feelings about that, but I think a prologue is a great way to either give a glimpse into something that happened in the past, something that has just happened that has a bearing on the story that the main character point of view wouldn't be known. So if you're writing in first person or close third person, as wonderful as that is, sometimes it can limit what you can tell the reader. And so like a prologue will give you a chance to sort of step outside that main character's point of view and give a little bit of a hint. And that can be a really effective thing to do kind of throughout a mystery or suspense or thriller, is to let the reader know something that your main character doesn't know. And that is, that can be effective. It's a little bit of a tricky balance, because you want to make sure that that main character stays sort of in charge and is not made to look foolish, because you want to maintain that respect. But that can be a super effective technique. I think the other thing, Kim and Libby were talking about pacing. I think that is so true with absolutely, any genre. And I think it's especially true with genres like mystery, suspense, thriller, just keeping things moving, not maybe belaboring description. We don't want like 5 pages of going to the mailbox or something like that. I mean, keep it all about, everything's going to develop the character, develop the plot. So keeping things moving, parse out details, don't sort of info dump and then, have long exposition. And don't make things too easy for your main character. Make things more difficult, because that's part of that story question, and that, wanting to solve the puzzle and wanting to have that sense of completion. We want to make things a little bit more difficult for that main character. I'm looking at some notes here. Make sure that you're always giving, this is for mystery in particular, make sure that you're true to that puzzle, that central question that you want to solve, whether it's the whodunit or the whydunit or why this victim. So keep that puzzle in mind. And I think in some genres like thriller, for example, having a compressed time frame can be helpful. There are so many great mysteries that take place over a long period of time. But if you look at, for example, Dan Brown, his books all take place within a 24-hour period. And that really accelerates sort of this sense of urgency. And, you really do want, everything's happening very quickly, so you really do want to find out what's going to happen next. Continuing to raise stakes, creating physical danger, a sense of peril. And I think that's sort of a main takeaway, is to never let the reader forget about what's at stake, whether it's solving a crime, bringing justice, helping the main character solve this internal conflict. We want to always keep the stakes sort of top of mind. So those are just some ways, really with any genre, to kind of keep that suspense and, keep those pages turning.
Definitely. No, that's great. I love the compressed timeline. That's a wonderful tip for mystery writers out there.
Yeah.
So Kim and Libby, Kathleen was saying how if you're in a first-person narrative or a close third, it can be tricky sometimes, with a constricted view rather than more of an omniscient view. Do you have personal favorite points of view that you like to explore or work with? And in your book, The Sixth Storm, you do have multiple points of view. So how did that work? How did you craft that together?
Well, this was part of the killing Jerry scenario. We started off with the point of view of the weatherman, and then juxtaposed with the point of view of the main character, Sky, who is the teen protagonist. And then we ended up deciding that Jerry needed to go as a point of view. He stayed as a character, but it really needed to be her story. She was experiencing, it needed to stay in her hands and in her eyes. Of course, that limited what could be revealed, as Kathy was saying. You end up with, you can only reveal what she personally experiences. So the cheat we did, if you want to call it that, was that the book, speaking of timeline, our book takes place over 1 week, so not quite 24 hours, but 1 week in January of 1999. But because there's a family curse involved, we did 5 flashbacks to characters who were ancestors of Sky's. And so in a very limited way still, we were able to sneak in some other information that Sky didn't have until the very end, but that the reader got little tastes of throughout to sort of tease out the story. So yeah, that's what we did.
Great, flashbacks, another awesome writing tool for your toolbox that you can utilize. So Sarah, kind of same vein. I'm curious, how do you write those steamy love scenes? How do you do it? And especially, how do you focus on your characters when you have in your book, multiple perspectives, and one of them is a male character? How do you go about writing that? How do you go about utilizing some of those tools?
Yeah, excuse me, I feel like I get that question a lot. Like, how do you write love scenes? How do you write a male love interest? Because I'm not a man, and love scenes can be kind of tricky for a lot of people to write, which I completely understand because, if you think of it, they're pretty intimate, and I guess, it can be kind of uncomfortable for a lot of people to, think about something like that and put it on paper. But for me, I actually really enjoy writing those types of scenes because for me, and this is a very basic, simple answer, but like, not just love scenes, but, romance, falling in love, developing feelings for another person. All of those things obviously eventually lead to, the characters physically being together. I mean, all of those things are things that most people know what that feels like. And we all know how fun it is to fall in love with somebody. And we know what it feels like when, you're flirting with somebody and you don't, like there's that anticipation and you wonder like, okay, do they like me? Like how I like them? And those are all, that like the butterflies in your stomach and all those fun feelings that I feel like most people can relate to. Those are all positive, fun things in my mind. And when I think about those things, it's really positive and it's enjoyable for me to write about those positive things. And really, it's just, for me, it's just a matter of thinking about all the things that, make me happy or make me, feel positive about romance and love scenes and whatever, and just putting it down on paper, essentially. It's not, I wish I had a more sophisticated answer, but I don't really. It's just, it's what I feel and it's what I like. It's what most people like when they're with their partner, and it's just putting it on paper. And I think, yeah, it can be private and intimate, but it's also like these two characters who are not me, obviously, and just imagining what most people would like with their partner. And I think that's pretty universal, those feelings of butterflies and, you know, somebody complimenting you and things, you know, you kiss somebody and that feeling, your stomach bursts or your heart beats really, really fast. As far as writing men or male characters go, again, that's a really simple answer for me. It's just, I think of all of the qualities that I like in a guy or that I would find attractive in another person, and I just write it down on, you know, in whatever story I'm working on. And it's not really that complicated for me. I mean, because I feel like those attractive qualities are pretty universal. I mean, like most everybody wants a partner who's loyal and thoughtful and, you know, very devoted to you, somebody who makes you laugh, somebody who remembers your birthday and you know, remembers what your favorite snack is or whatever. And obviously there's a physical attraction element in especially romance and rom-com, which in physical attraction is different for everybody. But for me, it's when I want to make sure that a male character feels like a real person, I try to think of like little things that, you know, just little things that people do for their partner when they want their partner to feel loved and appreciated. Because I guess for me, I feel like you can have the most physically attractive person or character, and if they aren't, but if that's all they are, it's not very compelling to the reader. You have to make them feel like a real person who is doing these thoughtful things. So like whether that's they, you know, like they get up early in the morning and they scrape your car windshield so like you don't have to do it, or you know, the male main character, he remembers her coffee order, even though like they went out for coffee like 2 months ago, but he remembers because it matters to her. He brings her breakfast in bed, or he loves playing with puppies or kittens or whatever it is. Like it's just those little things that I feel like help make a character feel like a real person, because it's not just a guy with a great 6-pack of abs. Like it's a guy who is, yeah, he's physically attractive, but he also knows how to make the main character feel wanted and appreciated and loved. And that's just kind of what I do, I guess.
No, those are all really great tips. Just keeping the person human. That's what we ultimately want in any book that we read. So Kathleen, speaking of what we're reading, do you have books that you would recommend for somebody who's trying to get into the mystery game? Do you have favorite books that you're currently reading, or anything that you are looking forward to reading next?
Yeah, you know, I do have a list of books on writing that I recommend. I know that my first one is on a lot of people's list, and that is the classic Stephen King's On Writing. You don't have to be a King fan to love this book. It certainly helps because it's sort of one part craft and one part autobiography. So you really learn a lot about King and his sort of metamorphosis, and it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend it. So that's my number one. For mystery specifically, there's a book called Writing and Selling Your Mystery Novel by Hallie Ephron. She is a wonderful writer and a great human being, and this is a fantastic resource, so I highly recommend that book. There's also a book called Structuring Your Novel by a woman named K.M. Weiland. She actually has a website, this is how I found her, called something like Writers Becoming Authors or something like that, and she is a devotee of sort of the beat approach to plotting, where, you know, you sort of deconstruct movies, for example, like you were talking about, Kim, and actually a lot of great Pixar examples, a lot of great Star Wars examples. And so she's very much into plotting, I don't want to say formula, but in a very precise way, where something happens at the 12% mark, something happens at the 25% mark, and that kind of thing. It's a great read. It comes with a workbook option as well. So those are some that I recommend. You know, there's, like anything, there are zillions of books to appeal to different kinds of writers, different kinds of genres, but those are some favorites. And as for what I've read recently that I've loved, I was just thinking, I just recommended this book to a friend. Since I love mystery, I read a lot of mystery. And I think the best mystery I've read lately is by this English author named Ruth Ware, and it's called The Turn of the Key. And it's a little bit of a nod to Turn of the Screw, but it's a fantastic retelling of a classic Gothic mystery. She's amazing. I love all of her work, and I highly recommend that book specifically. So that's a little book corner over here.
Perfect. So Kathleen just gave us some options for, plotting how-to books specific to a mystery. Kim, Libby, can you speak a little bit about, books that you utilize, and in general, what do you do when you don't know what to do next?
Well, Kathy mentioned Tana French earlier. She's hands down my favorite mystery writer. Oh my God, I just geek out every time whenever books comes out. I'm just like, okay, nobody talk to me.
She's so good.
And she is incredible. And I've always been a mystery lover. It's no accident that I guess that's what I ended up writing. And it was the other, Kathy, you also mentioned
Ruth Ware, or
it was the detectives and
the Dublin
Anna that you mentioned.
Yeah,
I was thinking of someone else too. Kate Atkinson wrote a bunch of really wonderful mysteries as well.
She's wonderful.
Yeah, she's jumped genres. She hasn't always done mystery, but her mysteries are my favorite. Right now, I mean, I'm actually mostly read nonfiction because that's mostly what I write. I have the overstory on my desk right now, and I read a lot of the New Yorker. Libby, what are you reading? I know what she's reading.
I've been reading a lot of mystery recently during quarantine. I just read The Body in the Woods.
It's a Portland author. I can't think of her name right now, and then she's also got a little Jules Verne going for school. But April Henry, that's The Body in the Woods, Portland author. You read another of hers too, didn't you? Just one. Okay. Yes, we both.
Sarah, what are you reading right now? Are you reading more in quarantine, or reading less, or revisiting old favorites? What do you think?
Yeah, I guess some days I'm reading more, and then some days I'm reading less. It just kind of depends on what my mood is that day, because it's such a wild time right now. I am currently rereading an old favorite, which is Persuasion by Jane Austen. I feel like anybody who loves romance, like Jane Austen is like, the person who, or the author that you probably read at some point who like kind of stroked that interest at first, especially if, so I have like, my little thing is like writing hate to love romances. It's like my favorite thing to write. So hate to love romances are one of my favorite things to read. And I feel like the OG hate to love romance is Pride and Prejudice. So yeah. So I love that one. I periodically reread my favorite parts of that one. But right now I'm reading a lot of just really, I don't know, feel good things, because, the world isn't that great right now overall. And I'm just, things to keep my mood up. So I love, I read the Bromance Book Club by Alyssa K. Adams. That was really fun. It's like it's a romance about a professional baseball player, and he and his wife are having a little bit of trouble in their marriage. So he's reading romance novels with a group of his male friends in order to figure out how to better understand his wife, which is, I thought that was a really creative concept, and I really like that. I really like Mia Hopkins has a really good romance series involving, so the main characters are reformed gang members in Southern California, LA, I think. So she wrote Trashed, and I want to say Thirsty and Tanked are the ones. There's so many of them, and they have similar titles, so I always get them mixed up, unfortunately. But all of them are amazing and good. Also, I really liked, one of my favorite books ever is A Girl Like You, and that's another book that I reread pretty often, by Gemma Burgess, who's that author who gave me the really good writing advice. And she just writes amazing, like, British contemporary rom-coms, essentially. And I feel like reading her books is like, the experience is almost like watching a movie to me. And it's just like, they're funny and a lot of stuff is happening, but it's totally relatable. And because, again, I think most people know what it's like to date and have that be a disaster, and then like you fall for somebody who you didn't think you would fall for. And so yeah, that's me right now, like a mix of old favorites with new stuff whenever I can get around to it.
Great. So are any of you working on something next? What projects are coming up for you? Have you finished a few? I know Sarah had a proof of her second novel recently. So what's everyone working on next?
Well, my 5th book came out April 1st, and it's a day trips to the Oregon coast. So really bad timing. About as bad as you could get. So, and it came out on April Fool's Day, so that helped.
Oh, but that irony is perfect, so we'll give it to you.
It was so that, you know, that one's out there for us all to look forward to. And I've been working on, the same publishing house does Off the Beaten Track series of travel books, and the author of Off the Beaten Path Oregon has retired, so they handed that book over to me. So I've been updating that one, which is my deadline's August 1st. Again, travel, but it won't be out till next year, so hopefully. And then just my day job as Ben magazine editor is the wheels. The wheels are going. How about you, Libby? You been writing anything?
Just school.
You've been writing some songs.
Yeah.
She's dabbling in songwriting. I'm outing her.
That's awesome.
Oh,
That's
awesome,
really
yeah.
cool.
She's got a knack. How about you guys?
You said you were working on something. What's coming up for you?
Yeah, so my 3rd book, As Directed, came out almost exactly a year ago. So happy 1-year birthday to As Directed. And I took a little bit of a break and am now working on my first standalone. It's also a mystery. I can't stop mysteries, but it's been really fun to sort of play with new characters in this new world. It's a little grittier than the Maggie O'Malley's series, which is not cozy, but it's a little bit more traditional and gentle mystery. This is a little bit darker, still definitely approachable, but that's been fun. It's been fun to get back to writing. It's also been painful. I've forgotten how hard it is to write. So yeah, that's what I've been working on.
So Sarah, your debut novel, Faker, came out to great critics. And what's your second novel? Tell us a little bit about that, if you can.
Yeah. So my second romance rom-com is called Simmer Down, and it's a rivals to lovers romance about these 2 competing food trucks in Maui. The main character runs a Filipino food truck with her mom, and then the eventual love interest runs a British food truck with his brother, and they're competing for the same very popular parking spot near the beach where all these tourists are. And they obviously don't like each other because they're trying to put each other out of business, but because they work so closely together, and there are some other comedic moments in the book that kind of throw them together, they eventually fall for each other. That comes out October 13th. And in the meantime, I'm self-publishing a novella next month, which is a second chance romance that takes place in Bend. which is kind of fun, hopefully. So that'll come out on Amazon June 9th, and that's kind of what's keeping me busy right now.
Well, we look forward to seeing that. And you can find many of these books that were mentioned today at your-deschutespubliclibrary.org. We have a lot of digital content right now to satisfy. We have audio books, which if you're a mystery reader or romance reader, could be interesting to try an audiobook of either of those. And we thank you so much again for joining us today, the four of you and you, our audience. If you have questions for our panelists, please send them along. We would love to hear from you, and they would love to hear from you. Once again, this is Plotters Plotting, a panel on how to plot. And if you are interested, we have a lot of great digital content at DeschutesLibrary.org under our calendar events. We are continuing digital content in programs, story times, and more. So check out DeschutesLibrary.org for all of that, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everyone.